Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont. And you probably don't know this, but I am an author, in that I have completed stories. By no means a good author, nor a successful one. But writing is one of my favourite hobbies, and one of the oldest forms of creativity we have as humans. A picture may speak 1,000 words, but I'll take literature over some cave paintings any day. It's also one of the easiest forms of creativity to break into. You don't need much beyond pen and paper, or a WordPad document, or a phone for that matter. Now, it's a hobby of mine I've been into practically all my life, but I've never spoken much about it before. So in this video, we're going to talk about the process of creating your own story, which of course is likely going to be different for everyone, and I would argue there's no right nor wrong way to go about it. Whether you just start writing one day without anything in mind, or planning everything in a meticulous manner. But we'll touch on each. For starters, maybe you want to get into writing, but you struggle somewhat with the format, what to do, how to pace it, and so forth. What to write about, coming up with things. If you feel that way, I think I know a good way for you to practice. Do you have a movie or a series you like? Well, try adapting it into a written story. Or perhaps it's a game. This all ties in with inspiration too. It's perfectly normal to watch, read, or play something that has an effect on you, inspiring you to create something of your own. But going back to this example, maybe you really love the video game Dark Souls. Try making that into a little book. Or if that's too daunting, one area, one episode of a TV show, you get the idea. Sure, it's not an original idea, but it'll help you get some practice in and help out a lot. I did something a little like this back with the most substantial piece of writing I've done. Quite a long time ago, my friends and I played MMORPGs, and we play on role-playing servers. A little like a tabletop Dungeons & Dragons style role-playing experience, where you are your character, right? My character was Mont. One of my friends I played with had the habit of calling me Mont in real life too, instead of Alex, which greatly amused. At any rate, we had a lot of those adventures in that MMO, and I decided to collect them all and turn them into a novel. So in a way, this is a lot like what I was suggesting in turning something you enjoy into a story, because I already knew all the story beats. I knew what happened as it had already happened, and all I really had to do was link it all together and wrap it up into a proper narrative, because wow, some of those things seemed very disjointed. So to summarize this point, take something you enjoy, turn it into a novel. A useful exercise, if you ask me. It takes out a lot of the creative process and has you focus more on the act of writing, the technical side of it. But what about those who prefer just to start writing without any real sort of plan? Maybe you have some sort of inspiration and loose idea in mind and just want to see what comes of it. This can certainly be a fun way to go about it, because there's nothing stopping you from going back to earlier chapters to fix and change things. And it can certainly give things a certain type of energy if you come up with it all on the fly. But you will need to be careful that you don't run into issues caused by a lack of planning. An approach like this might also have someone running into the problem of burning out if that initial surge of inspiration fades. So I'd say this might be best just for a very short story, but of course, I'm sure it can work for longer form content too. Finally, what if you want to plan things out? Lately, I've had the inspiration to work on a new novel, just for fun, for the most part. I'm not expecting it to make me any money. Nice as that would be, I think I've sold like 5 copies of my first book. But selling copies wasn't the goal, it was just, oh, I've done it, I might as well stick it up, you know. But I've taken the approach with this new one of planning it out as well as I can prior. The first step of planning any story, in my opinion, is what is the point of your story? If you had to summarize it with a single sentence or a single word even. Of course, whilst it's good for you to know this, it isn't inherently necessary that you hammer said point into the reader. They will, of course, form their own opinions. Take Lord of the Rings, for example. What is the point of that? Is it that the smallest person can make the biggest impact on the world? Or that good always triumphs over evil? How if you have faithful friends at your side, you can achieve anything? or that something so small as a ring can corrupt even the greatest men, and to always be mindful of how you live your life. You get the idea. For my first proper story, the aforementioned 5-copy seller, or around there, even that might be too many, all things considered, but the theme was brotherhood. And for me, the point was how to reconcile differences with those who are close to you. To put it another way, what if you have a lawful good character and a chaotic evil character, to use like those Dungeons and Dragons alignment terms? Can they still be friends? You know, I feel like that's kind of relevant these days too, where you have people looking at others of a different, say, political persuasion, and acting like they are mortal enemies who must duel each other at dawn. Of course, once you have that staple of your story in mind, you need to think of a setting. Me? I like fantasy settings. I like taking issues that are timeless and using them in a fantastical setting of roughly medieval ages where you'd expect to see knights and such. No real firearms, maybe some magic. Whether high fantasy or low, that's just something that has always appealed to me on a personal level. But you need to think about what your setting can do for your story. Take sci-fi, for example. Blade Runner is sci-fi, but that is because it makes a great framework for the replicants who form such a core part of that story. What does it mean to be human? At the same time, you can take that and you can make it work in, say, a fantasy setting too, if you change up some things. I would argue it's never a good idea to go with a setting just for the sake of it though. Good sci-fi stories aren't good because they have spaceships and laser guns. Those are just incidental to the story. Likewise, with fantasy, just about any story can work in any setting, but think about which proves the most conducive for your story. For example, in the one I've started writing, I'm going with fantasy again. Magic exists in the setting, but is an extremely recent discovery of the last decade or two, meaning that its uses are still being explored and understood. They play into the story in ways beyond, say, shooting a fireball at a rabbit. How does magic alter the dynamics between lords and their vassals? How does it impact the economy, building, farming, all these things? How are they impacted by magic? But whilst those are considerations, they aren't to be focused on wholesale. How they work with the narrative I'm aiming for is the important thing. The narrative isn't about the magic, but that is a background factor that's important in the world at that time. What I'm going for with this story, the idea, the hope, is at least, will readers sympathise with the main character and stay on that character's side, no matter what path he takes? You could say it's an anti-hero, Byronic hero sort of situation. But I always find that interesting. Will you side with a character because you are familiar with them, even if another character is opposed to them, but you're unfamiliar with them? But they might, in many aspects, be correct. Well, once you've decided on all that, of course, you can break the story down into a short summary and a long summary. The short summary would be, for example, a paragraph that summarizes the entire story. To use Lord of the Rings as an example once again, Frodo is a hobbit, living in a idyllic countryside village. He is wrapped up in an adventure to destroy a ring of great power, for only he is able to carry it without succumbing to evil. He must journey to the faraway Mount Doom, guided by his friends and allies, whilst global events unfurl around him. Not great, but you get the idea of what I'm going for, off the top of my head, right? Then you'd have a longer summary, which touches more on the themes and gives a general breakdown of events, such as Frodo travels to Bree, meets Aragorn, a strider who protects the Shire, Frodo and Aragorn head to Rivendell, and so on. Then once you have the major story beats, you can start to split it out a bit more and try and see how it breaks up into chapters or indeed parts. In the past, I enjoyed using a 3-part structure for books. Of course, almost all books and all stories do use, 3 parts of, beginning, middle, and end, but I like to break it up into 3 specific parts, like Part 1, the journey, Part 2, the bursting, Part 3, the annihilation, stuff like that. Because then you can give each part a self-contained story with its own beginning, middle, and end. You could equate these parts to, seasons of a TV show, or even like arcs in a manga or anime, if you like. But you get the idea, right? It's different stories but all working towards the same overall story arc. So if you have a short summary and a long summary, you could also summarize the summary and make a checklist or timeline of events depending on how detailed your long summary was, so that you have very quick references for the order of things. And then you can start working on each chapter. Some people might prefer to work on them out of order. Whilst I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I certainly, when I was writing my first thing, I wrote a few of the end chapters first because that's what I was inspired to do. But for the most part, I prefer to go in order, as the journey often plays such a big part, and for me, I can find it a bit hard to, say, develop a character if I'm jumping around at points of their development, you know? Say in chapter 5 a major thing alters a character's perspective on the world. Going back and forth between that is hard for me. It's probably not hard for people who are actually good at writing, but you get the idea. I like to keep it on a smooth curve. It's good to have reference material though. I call them Bibles, which I think is a fairly common sort of term for it. These days with the internet, you can even create your own private wiki for easy cross-references. List out your characters, their relations, their countries of birth, places in the world, important items and so forth, and talking purely from experience, it's really useful to have a list of characters even if all it says is like name, height, eye colour, all that sort of stuff. Quite often I'll be writing something about a side character and I'm like, was that character brown-haired or black-haired? I've forgotten. And then I've go and look in an earlier chapter. So if you have that reference material to hand, it's useful. Well, I think that about does it for this part, this first part. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask down below. Maybe you have suggestions of your own if you've been writing as well. The nice thing about writing, after all, is there's so many ways to go about it. I mean, we didn't even touch on things like perspective. Are you writing it from third person, first person, a point of view, or a more drawn out style of narrative? Well, at any rate, if the inspiration strikes, I might do a follow-up talking about things like creating and developing characters, but that's going to do it for this part. So, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Ciao.